Let me tell you about Rosa. At 15, her boyfriend dumped her, and then the COVID lockdowns hit. Dejected, she turned to the internet. And she was dragged down the rabbit hole of gender ideology and came out the other side with a buzz cut, saying she was now non-binary and demanding testosterone. Her parents were lost. This was not the girl that they had raised for the last 15 years. Where did this come from? Well, they took Rosa to the experts, and all the experts said their daughter was now their son, and they had to accept that. The only thing they could do now was to put her on testosterone, maybe even consider a double mastectomy. Their parents couldn't do that. Her parents no. So instead, they turned to my guest today, a very lone and brave psychiatrist who refuses to submit to the religion of gender ideology. By lovingly holding firm to the truth, she saved Rosa and so many like her from a life of pain and irreversible medical interventions. She's here today to tell us how to do it. She shows us the way that we can get out of this transgender craze that is crushing our children and the future. Please welcome to the podcast author and psychiatrist, Dr. Miriam Grossman. But first, before we get to the podcast, if you're like me and you wear glasses, I bet you love the adjustment process every time you have to get a new prescription, right? It's just, you just live with them for a while. You got a fresh eye exam, and then they put it in with the glasses, and there's only spots that you have to learn where to look. I want to tell you about Rodenstock glasses with biometric progressive lenses from Better Spectacles. Now, if that sounds like futuristic technology, it is. Rodenstock has been around forever in Europe, known all around the world as the best in eyeglasses. They are the first lens manufacturer now that uses the latest artificial intelligence technology to create biometric intelligent glasses. When you're wearing them, you will experience the full, it's like a letterbox, the full screen of peripheral vision, precise depth and perception, and the largest reading zone of any lenses on the market. Now, the optical store business model in the U.S. is mostly based on fashion frames, and the function part usually comes second, but with their Rodenstock glasses, Better Spectacles can give you both and put them both first. Most are set in titanium and won't break unless you run them over with a truck. It's biometric intelligent glasses with artificial intelligence from Rodenstock at Better Spectacles. Go now to betterspectacles.com/Beck and schedule your teleoptical appointment. Get your glasses for 61% off right now. betterspectacles.com/Beck. Dr. Grossman, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I think I want to start with the story of Rosa. Because I feel for her parents and her, and tell the audience the story.
Sure. Well, first of all, Glenn, thank you very, very much for having me on.
Oh, sure.
It's really an honor.
Thank you.
So Rosa is the name of a girl that I saw in my private practice, and I described this story in my book, Lost in Transnation, A Child Psychiatrist's Guide Out of the Madness. Rosa was in the 8th grade, and she had always been a very feminine girl who didn't have any trouble with that and was happy being a girl and loved wearing bikinis and was perfectly fine with her body. There was never any indication that she was unhappy. And so her parents, who, by the way, were wonderful, as almost all the parents are in my private practice, which is devoted to these kids and their families, wonderful, loving, devoted parents. And one day she made an announcement that she is no longer their son, that she is actually, no longer their daughter, she's their son. And she requested that they call her by another name, a boy's name, and use masculine pronouns, and so on. The whole thing. We're all familiar with that by now, of kids wanting to go through what's called social transitioning, as if that's even possible. Of course, a boy cannot become a girl cannot become a boy. I think it's important to emphasize that, even though I'm sure that your audience is aware of that. I just, I start off every interview reminding people that there's no medical or scientific basis for the idea that you can be one sex in your mind and that be at odds with your physical reality of your body, which of course is the foundation of this ideology.
Right.
That mind can be at odds with your body, and that when that happens, it's a normal variant, we're told, and that the mind takes precedence and overrides the body. That is the foundational premise of this whole ideology.
So
there is no sense.
Let me just pause for a second before we go any deeper. I feel horrible for these parents because everything you just said, I believe. But you're one of the only doctors left on the hill of sanity. And if you were going through these things, the schools, the doctors, they're all regurgitating the same stuff, and parents don't know what to do.
That's correct.
So how did the parents feel about this, and what happened?
Okay, so in this particular case with Rosa, the parents immediately, to their credit, realized that something else must be going on with her. A girl does not all of a sudden declare that she's a boy, and they had common sense, and they realized that they have to find a therapist like myself who is not going to automatically affirm the new identity, celebrate the new identity, and put the child in the driver's seat, which is, you're right, Glenn, it is what it's what many, many therapists do these days, and it is what almost all of our mainstream medical and mental health associations are telling us to do. So the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, all these large mainstream legacy organizations that I was always trained to trust, to depend on, to give me solid guidance as a doctor, as a therapist, we can no longer trust those organizations because they have simply been taken over. They have, they drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And the members of the organizations that do not agree with it are intimidated into silence.
So how did you've been warning about this since about, I think, 2009, when nobody was paying attention. They just think this just came up, and you point out very clearly, no, this has been around for a while. The seeds have been planted. We're now at a place to where I think we're repeating the early eugenics programs here in America. And God forbid it goes further like it did in Europe. But we're at a place now where our doctors are not to be trusted at times because they are steering us with philosophy, or in this case, I think more of a theology. It's a faith that is denying reality and actual science. And that creates an extraordinarily dangerous situation for
Right.
society.
You're absolutely right. It is not at all a science. It is more like a religion. And kids are indoctrinated with this religion as if they are established facts. I mean, these things are stated with astonishing certainty, that just the idea that there's something such as changing your sex, or having one sex in your mind and one sex between your legs, which is what kids are told. The idea, this new vocabulary, transgender, cisgender, non-binary, these ideas are indoctrinated into our kids' minds. They are just flooded with this from every angle as they go through the day. And they're led to believe that these are undisputed facts. And nothing could be further from the truth. There is a debate that is raging right now. And in fact, Glenn, this is the first time in many years that I feel some degree of optimism about this thing being taken down. And the reason I feel optimistic is just in the past year, and especially in the past few months, I mean, the amount of evidence that we have that all of this is just a pile of what there is so much evidence. It's formidable. Evidence is formidable.
It's remarkable to me that I've grown up in a time where all the, official doctor clubs are all saying the same thing. We need to be more progressive like Europe. And Europe has turned around and said, stop this. This is madness. We're wrong on it. We're stopping it. It's being eradicated around the world to some degree. At least we're at the beginning of that. But we still seem to be, for some reason, just lockstep with denial.
Yes. Well, in this country and in Canada, we are the two outliers now in the world, I would say. There are so many countries in Europe and Scandinavia, Britain, that have done a 180 after their medical authorities sat down and looked at the evidence very carefully over months and years, examined the evidence for and against the medicalization of these kids, meaning putting them on puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones and sometimes surgery. Those countries, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Britain, Denmark, and others, have now done a 180, and they are saying either we will no longer make those medical interventions available to under 18, or we will do so exercising extreme caution. And at the same time, we in this country, kids can walk into Planned Parenthood and get these medications in 30 minutes.
What? Why? Why is this happening here? Why are we the outliers, us in Canada?
It's a good question. The left is extremely powerful, and the left took over like I said earlier, our medical associations, and they steamrolled their agendas through these associations. They got, certain laws legislated in a lot of states. They've been very successful, and our side has not been paying enough attention until now. And it's late.
There's people that have never heard of WPATH. I didn't even know what it was. We're doing a special on it. When we first brought it up, I had never really heard about it. Can you talk to me about what they are, what they do, and their role in removing a very important word, disorder.
Okay, well, WPATH is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. WPATH. It's an international organization. There's a branch here in the US. And essentially, it sounds like a very reputable professional medical organization. And it was at one time until about 25 years ago when ideology prevailed and took over. But until that time, you see, Glenn, we always knew in psychiatry that there were extremely rare individuals, one in many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, who for some reason have a sense of discomfort with their sex, being male or female. It can be a very intense discomfort. It can be devastating to live with.
Mm-hmm.
But again, extremely rare. And the psychiatric associations always considered this condition to be a disorder. And what happened was, I just have to say, you're kind of confusing WPATH with APA and the DSM. So it was, in terms of not considering it a disorder, officially, that was the American Psychiatric Association. And they changed their categorization of this condition about 10, 11 years ago. They changed it from falling into the category of a disorder into simply what they decided to call it, instead of a disorder, was gender dysphoria, which means unhappiness with being male or female. So they removed it from the category of being a disorder. And that was a landmark decision. That was a watershed moment, because the Psychiatric Association, separate from WPATH, I'll get back to WPATH in a moment, but the flagship, worldwide flagship organization of psychiatrists, the American Psychiatric Association, was announcing to the world that we no longer consider this to be an emotional disorder. We no longer, when a girl wants her healthy breasts to be removed, when a boy wants his healthy genitals to be removed, we no longer are considering this a psychiatric disorder. Now, that was huge when that happened, as you can understand. And the way that happened, and I explain it in detail in the book, the way that it happened is that there was a small committee of people, and it was their responsibility to make the decision of what to do with this particular diagnosis. They were under a lot of political pressure. Mm-hmm. They also, I'll just say on their behalf, that they felt compassion for these people. And we should feel compassion for these people because their lives can be very miserable. So it was out of compassion. It was because of a result of political pressure, both within the APA and from without the APA. And there were individuals, Glenn, who argued that the entire diagnosis should just be removed. Just omit the diagnosis completely from the DSM, which is the catalog of psychiatric diagnoses that we use. But the reason why it was decided to keep the diagnosis of gender dysphoria is because if it was removed, there would be no code to use for insurance reimbursement for the treatments.
Oh my gosh.
Now, these people, obviously, many of them do need to, do choose to modify their bodies so that they will appear to be the opposite sex. They take puberty blockers. They then take cross-sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen and other hormones. And then many of them get surgeries, which are extremely expensive. Now, once a young person goes on puberty blockers, almost all of them will continue on to cross-sex hormones, which means they will be a consumer of pharmaceuticals for the rest of their life.
Oh my gosh.
They will be a medical patient for the rest of their lives because they're dependent on these pharmaceuticals to maintain the physical persona that they have chosen. So you have to understand, you need to have a code in order to get reimbursed for all of these medical interventions. And that was one of the big reasons that psychiatry held on to the gender dysphoria and did not eliminate it completely.
It is remarkable to me that the doctors, they have to have seen the results. Watching these kids go through, many of them really regret it. They have to see this. And when you brought up the prescription drugs that they will have to take for the rest of their life, could it be that simple, that it's money, that it's big pharma that's really pushing this? No.
Well, now we're going into more the macro issues, not the micro. I'm a child psychiatrist, so I focus more on the families and the kids, and I think we should get back to Rosa in a minute. But there's no question that this is extremely lucrative. And at the same time, Glenn, that we're talking about the profits made by the pharmaceutical companies from the blockers and the cross-sex hormones, and of course the surgeons and all the surgeries, you have to also consider that we are creating a generation of young people who are sterile.
Right.
They cannot reproduce biologically. And even though many of them, as you can imagine, when they're 12 or 15 or even 20 years old, they might say, well, I don't care. I don't want to have kids. I'll adopt kids. It doesn't matter to me. You know what? When they hit 30 and 35, many of them seem to be realizing that they're missing out by not having a biological child, and some of them really do regret it. And then what's their option? Their only option is assisted reproductive technology, which of course means IVF, surrogacy, and then that's a whole other gold mine of opportunity for reproductive technologies.
So what was it that allowed you to take a stand and be kind of alone on this island when you have, WPATH, you have DSM, going the opposite direction? You had to have, I'm sure you have received a ton of pushback and name calling, at best. What was it that kept you rock solid?
Well, at first I was afraid. I was very hesitant. But when you see families that are suffering to the degree that I've seen, and you see young people, girls going through menopause when they're 15 years old,
Jeez.
Young men who have had their genitals removed, the degree of mental illness that these children had going into this, and it's clear to anyone who is willing to face reality that what this is a social contagion that is, like wildfire moving through our schools. Kids are being introduced to these ideas online by their teachers, by their guidance counselors, and they are simply, especially during COVID, So many kids were anxious and depressed. So many kids are on the autism spectrum and they have no friends and they're looking for ways to fit in. So it just became so clear to me. And I saw so much suffering. I saw too much to stay silent. And I'm so happy that I started speaking up because, as you know, in the beginning it might be frightening, but courage is a habit.
It is.
And
it's a muscle.
You know, the more you do it, the easier and even fun it becomes.
I love that. The percentage, I mean, this just, it has to scream at anybody with reason that there's no way you could have this dysphoria and suddenly a rise of 4,000% of cases. That just seems completely irrational to believe that's normal.
Well, it is. What the proponents of this ideology argue is that because our culture has changed and is becoming more accepting of being transgender, then it's so much easier now for people to speak up and announce their authentic selves. That is the argument that you would get from the other side. But if that was the case, Glenn, think about it. If that was the case, that the proportion of transgender individuals was so high in every generation, then you would have, excuse me, you would have people, you would have this flood of people suddenly coming out as transgender in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. You would have it in every age group. But we do not have that. We have that in preteens, teenagers, and young adults is where this epidemic is hitting. Now, I will say something else, which is they're so intellectually dishonest. Because at the same time that the activists argue that there are so many more transgender individuals now because society is more accepting of them, they will, on the other hand, say that the reason why these kids have so many mental health issues is because there's so much transphobia. So they want to have it both ways. There's so much transphobia, which means the kids are depressed and anxious and they don't accept themselves. But the numbers of people who are coming out as transgender is thousands of times more than it's ever been because society is so accepting. You can't have it both ways.
So let me go back to Rosa and how you treated, when the parents came to you, I would imagine they came to you like any parent and said, this can't be, it doesn't make sense. Help. How do you help people like this?
It's in many ways, it's the same way that I would help any patient, which means, first of all, you get to know the person sitting in front of you. You have to explore them. Who are they? What's their life about? What's going on at school? What's happening at home? I want to know about their friends. I want to know about their dreams in life. I want to know what they've been through. Have they been traumatized? So in that way, it's similar to any other patient that would walk into my office. Now, mind you, therapists, so-called gender-affirming therapists, do not do this huge exploration that typically we would do in mental health.
Correct.
They immediately accept the new identity.
Right. So that's why it was important that the word disorder was there. Once you take that out, now we're just going to walk you through it. We're going to help you.
Well, you're going to put the child in the driver's seat.
Correct.
And you're going to say, what name do you want me to use? What pronouns do you want me to use? And how can I help you on this journey? This is your journey. Only you know who you are. And mind you, we're doing this with a 5-year-old.
Right.
Only you know your identity. You tell me, the doctor, what you would like to do. Do you feel like, if let's say the child is 10 or 11 and they're about to go into puberty, if the child says, I'm really nervous about my body changing, I don't want my voice to drop, I don't want to grow facial hair, well then that means this child, according to gender affirming care, which is the predominant, that is what everyone in this country is supposed to be practicing. We are supposed to make puberty blockers available to that child without any gatekeeping, without any consideration of perhaps this child has emotional problems, perhaps he or she is on the autism spectrum and is uncomfortable with their body for some reason. Maybe this child was abused or neglected or bullied or what have you.
Or maybe it's just also part of nature when your body is changing, and it's a weird thing to go through. Your hormones and everything gets all screwed up, and you're in that time period. Everybody is like a ticking time bomb because you're not sure. And there's this song from a group called AJR. It's called "Don't Take Away My Legos," and it's a song whose lyrics are, "I don't want to grow up. Mom and Dad, I'm going to move out, but don't throw away my Legos because I'm not done being a kid. I want to come back. Maybe I want to come back." And that's a traumatic thing, and it's real, and it happened to all of us.
And there is fear of adulthood, and there's fear of becoming a sexualized person. When you go through puberty, which all of us had to do in order to become adults, it's not only our bodies that are changing and becoming overtly identifiable as being men or women. It's our entire system. Our brains are maturing and becoming adult brains. Puberty is a period that we all have to go through. But you're right. It can be scary for many, many kids.
Right.
And especially, yes, kids are afraid of adulthood. That is another factor. This is a complex topic. Yeah, going back to Rosa, I got to know Rosa better over time. And I learned that she had, during COVID, during lockdowns, she had been online almost 24/7. And she had met a bunch of other girls online who were all identifying as boys. And they were very troubled girls. They exposed her to pornography. They exposed her to all kinds of suicidal, self-harm behaviors. And these girls had a tremendous influence on Rosa. And she became obsessed with this group of kids that all considered themselves boys. And she was influenced by them to also think that she may be a boy. And that's where all of this came from. And when we discovered that, and her parents, of course, went into her social media. And Glenn, I have to say to all the parents that are watching and listening, you have to get control of your child's internet use. And in my book, which is right here, Lost in Transnation, I have a bunch of appendices in the back of the book. One of them instructs parents on how to get control of your child's internet use. You must do this. I can't emphasize it enough. The internet is filled with adults who are just waiting to find a way to access your child. And they access your child in all sorts of places that you would not imagine. So you must get control of your kid's internet. Getting back to Rosa, when her parents discovered that all this had been going on, my advice to them was that they were going to have to cut her off from this friend group, cold turkey. And it was not an easy thing to do, because these girls, who all identified as boys, who were troubled, mentally ill, self-harming, burning themselves, and encouraging Rosa into these behaviors as well. There had to be a break, between this friend group and Rosa.
Boy, but when you're addicted to something like I imagine Rosa was, and in that group, going, wow, that's tough for the parents, because I'm sure she immediately looked as her parents as enemies, because her truth was not being recognized, the truth of this group.
Right. So that's another element. The kids are indoctrinated to believe that anyone that does not get with the program and celebrate the new identity, new names, and new pronouns does not love them, does not care about them. And so
it's a
very, very, very difficult situation for parents. They are walking along a tightrope, and Glenn, we could spend the rest of the day just discussing what it's like for these parents. But I do want the parents listening to know that there is help out there, and they should not be going through this alone. There is no reason to be isolated. My website, miriamgrossmanmd.com, has a long list of resources where parents can get support and guidance on how to deal with this situation. So getting back to Rosa, yes, it was for a few weeks a family crisis in which she was desperately trying to reach these girls. She did actually become, at least she expressed, Rosa did, some suicidal thoughts. Now listen to this, Glenn. When she did that, and I assessed her for being suicidal, and she would not agree to not harm herself. Now, as a child psychiatrist, when I have a patient who I believe really could harm themselves, and I'm worried about them still being home with all the possibilities that exist of harming oneself, I have to put the child in the hospital, even if it's temporary. The problem is, Glenn, that right now, the adolescent psychiatric units in our hospitals are creating transgender children. The kids are going into the hospital and they are not transgender identified. And they are leaving 2 weeks later and they are transgender identified. So, and this is a very well-known phenomenon. And I've talked to individuals who work on the units, these adolescent units. And so as a psychiatrist for kids, I am in a real bind.
Yeah.
Because what do we do when a kid needs to go into the hospital for their own safety? But I know that in the hospital, this falsehood, this ideology, these beliefs about being born in the wrong body are going to be inculcated into the child, and a good proportion of the other kids who are on the unit, 50-60% of kids who are now on psychiatric units, are identifying as transgender or non-binary, whatever that means, or one of those new identities. So it was a very difficult time, not only for the parents, but for myself. We managed to keep her out of the hospital. To make a long story short, once she was away from that influence, that online influence, right, she was back with her friends at school. She did have a wonderful, close-knit family. I had to put her on medication for a while, but she ended up doing well. And toward the end of the therapy, when I asked her, what does she think now about what happened with her? She was so sure that she was a boy. She said, I don't know, Dr. Grossman, I just got involved with those kids and they were a really bad influence on me. I don't know how that happened, but I know I don't even want to think about it. I don't even want to go there.
More with Dr. Grossman in just a second. She will be in the Galileo Club someday, I think, refusing to sit down because she knows the truth. If you live in pain, I used to live in horrible pain every single day. And if you've done it, I know how much it just sucks and it drains the color out of your world. I tried everything to get it to go away. I'm sure you did. Thankfully, my wife heard about Relief Factor, and that changed my world forever. I got my life back. So if you're dealing with what I was dealing with or anything like it, maybe today's the day you should give it a try. Don't be surprised if you find yourself feeling like a completely new person, like I have. Relief Factor is a daily supplement. It helps your body fight that pain. It's 100% drug-free, developed by doctors to help reduce or eliminate pain. Just try their three-week quick start. They're not dragging this out. They're not saying it works for everybody. 70% of the people who try the 3-week quick start go on to order more. 30% don't. They're open about that. Just try it. Try it for 3 weeks. If it doesn't work, stop taking it. But if you feel any difference, keep taking it. 800-4-RELIEF. 800-4-RELIEF or relieffactor.com. What is the percentage of kids that are going through this that see a doctor like you and escape this?
Well, it's hard to know the answer to that. There are more and more therapists who are practicing what we call gender critical or gender exploratory therapy. There is a group called therapyfirst.org, and these are therapists who, like myself, are not going to put the child in the driver's seat. And we believe that when somebody chooses a new identity and clings to that new identity, there's a reason for it. Mm-hmm. And you must explore it. You must get to the bottom of why is a girl running from her femininity? Was she molested? Was she abused? Was she bullied at school? Why does she think that living as a boy will improve her life? These are the kind of questions, you don't ask these questions on day one.
Right.
You have to first get to know the child and get to know the family and build trust. But slowly, you can begin to gently kind of wonder, I wonder why you're attracted to the idea of being a boy. Let's talk about what that may be about. What are the possibilities? When did that first happen? When did you even hear about this idea? And then slowly the story comes out, and it's definitely possible to help many of the kids. I will say, though, that when they are extremely indoctrinated, it can be terribly uphill and even impossible. And it gets to the point where I have sometimes felt like this is no longer psychiatry. This is a cult. This is mind control. Mm-hmm. This child has been recruited into a cult. And my speaking to them, for an hour every week is just not going to do it, because after that hour, they go out into the world back to their friends, back to the internet, back to, the teachers and the guidance counselor and everyone out there in the world that's telling them that I'm the bad guy and their parents are the bad guy. And sometimes it just, I can't help them sometimes.
That is tragic. It is. I think I said earlier, this is a cult, and it has all of the earmarks of a cult. The high priests of the cult say, don't trust your parents, don't trust your family. If they turn against you, they're part of the problem. Only listen to me. My way is the only way. Don't question anything. And,
Right.
Some people die in those cults because they can't come back out.
Well, and some people are dying from this particular cult and ideology. And if not, of course, every death is a terrible, terrible tragedy. But we also have shattered lives. We have people who, didn't go through a normal adolescence. They've lost years of their lives, years of important developmental milestones. And now they're in their 20s or 30s, and they're trying to make up for that, to say nothing of the physical disfigurement. So, this is, the body count is very high. And we haven't even started talking about the families, the siblings, the marriages, the destroyed marriages over this issue. So the damage is massive.
So why is it that,
but like I said,
why is it that nobody talks about the family or the parents? I can't imagine I can imagine, because I've gone through some mental health issues with my kids, and I can imagine doing, look, I just want them to be happy, and be who they are and be happy and everything else. And, but you feel completely alone and isolated. And, I wouldn't have known about you, and everything in our society is shouting that you are a monster if you do that. Why doesn't anyone talk about the parents who really just want to do the right thing by their child, but see this and go, this cannot be the right thing?
Well, there's a few answers to that. First of all, we tend to always go back to the kids. And I noticed this early on, that when I was speaking to parents, and the parents were clearly traumatized, and the parents' mental health was declining, and they weren't sleeping, and they weren't eating, and they weren't functioning, and they were crying all day. And I tried to say to them, let's put the child to the side now. I just want to talk about you. I want to talk to both of you and your husband, what you're going through right now. And we would start for a few minutes, and it always went back to the kid. Mm-hmm. Now, this is the natural, I think, inclination of loving parents, to always go back to the kid and to not put yourself first. Like you said, you want your kid to be okay. When our kids are suffering, we suffer. It's very hard to see your child suffer the way that these kids do, and to understand that they are on a path toward harm. They are on an irreversible path toward medical interventions that they will have to live with the rest of their lives. If a girl goes on testosterone, her voice will begin to drop within 3 months. That is forever. She's going to have, a lowered voice forever within 3 months. And some of these girls might be 13 or 14 years old when they go on testosterone. They are in no position whatsoever to give an informed consent.
We don't let kids drink until they're. They don't let kids drink until they're 21. We don't let them drive till they're 16. We don't let them have guns. My gosh, this is life-changing.
So Glenn, you and I just did exactly what I was explaining. We went back to the kids. But the parents, you see, a majority of parents who are not going along with it do not want to go public. They are afraid if they go public, that their child will discover that they have become activists on the other side. So there are many forums, and there are websites, and there are support groups for parents. But essentially, these parents, almost all of them, are anonymous. Now, my dedication of the book is devoted to these parents who have been abandoned by my profession, the medical and mental health professions, utterly abandoned. And they have been demonized by my profession. Now, I will tell your listeners there's an incredible Substack called PITT, P-I-T-T, Parents with Inconvenient Truths About Trans. Again, it's a Substack, P-I-T-T, and it is filled with hundreds and hundreds of the most remarkable essays written anonymously by parents. Please read some of those essays about what these parents have gone through and are going through. Now, you ask why we don't hear from the parents. So partly it's because they want the focus to be on the kids. They want to remain anonymous. But it's also because my profession won't acknowledge their existence and won't acknowledge their trauma. Now, my profession acknowledges the trauma of every other group. You know, if you have a school shooting or a natural disaster, or, even someone who is a sexual abuser, a perpetrator, someone who's committed rape, someone who's murdered. In my profession, I worked in a prison for years, so I know that we find ways of being able to sit down with these people and work with them and acknowledge that they have issues and that it's our responsibility to be there for them as well. Mm-hmm. Even if they have been, if they're a serial murderer, if they're a serial rapist, a serial child abuser, we sit down and we provide them with therapy, compassionate therapy.
Correct.
But when it comes to the parents who are refusing to affirm their kids and deny reality, those parents are not acknowledged as going through trauma and going through terrible suffering and PTSD.
I cannot imagine if my little girl, who, was a ballerina, and she grows up, she's 16, she comes home from school, and suddenly she says, I'm a boy, and she's on hormones, and I'm starting to see her grow a beard. I don't know how I would live with that, because I know who she is, and I know the world we're living in, and that it would just be devastating.
It is exactly that. It is devastating. And sometimes, Glenn, you have one parent that can live with it with difficulty and the other who cannot.
Well,
and what do you do?
Right. Well, so let's stop there for just a second and go to, I could not, and I've had a talk with my family on this, as we've talked about this generally. because my younger kids are like, Dad, out of respect, you should. And I said, they can call themselves whatever they want, but I will always address somebody as I would if I had to bring them to the hospital. I'm not going into a hospital ER room with somebody who claims they're a woman and say, this is a woman. She's a man. Science is science. And it's not healthy to engage in other people's disease. You can love them, but it's not healthy. Glenn, you're an alcoholic. No, I'm not. You are. But I love you, and when you start to get help, you'll realize for anybody in my life who would deny that I'm an alcoholic, I'm in recovery now for almost 30 years, but would deny that I'm an alcoholic and say, oh, you know what? You don't have a problem. You just keep drinking. Doesn't really love me. Doesn't love me.
Well, Glenn, you can explain to your kids, and I want your audience to know as well, that when it comes to the new names and pronouns, what we call social transitioning, a report just came out of England about 2 weeks ago. It's a report by a very prominent pediatrician who was asked by the National Health Service of England to review all the data that exists on helping these kids. And she reported, it's called the CASS report, CASS. She reported not only is there no evidence that the medicalization, that the hormones and surgeries do not provide long-term benefit, there also is no evidence that the social transition does not provide long-term evidence. To the contrary, the social transitioning of these kids puts them on the path toward the medicalization, the experimental medicalization. So we are not doing a favor to these kids by denying reality, by essentially saying to them, yeah, I agree with you. You were born in the wrong body. I will call you by a new name and new pronouns because you are one of the mistakes walking around. Maybe God did make a mistake with you. And so I'm going to honor your new name and your new pronoun and new identity. We have no evidence in the long run of benefit of doing that.
I will tell you that goes against the American nature. The American nature is, hey, you do what you want and what's right for you, and I'm not gonna judge you. And that becomes very, very dangerous when it's played out to these extremes. But we don't like to judge people. We don't like to worry ourselves about somebody else's business, and it's just, that's who we are, and it's being used against us. That good nature. Hey, you're my neighbor and I can get along with you even though we disagree. That's been turned around against us. And so we're made to feel like monsters if we don't. I mean, I've heard Jenner, when Bruce Jenner came out and said, I had this life that I was miserable my whole life. I felt bad for him. I felt really bad. I don't want somebody to go through all of that. And to know that his whole life he felt like that is so tragic. Now, he's different because he doesn't, insist that everybody play along. He's more reasonable. But I don't want anybody to have those feelings, but we can't go down this road.
Well, I'm glad you're bringing up Jenner because, you see, the group of kids that we are now faced with, all of us, in our offices and schools, the tsunami of kids identifying as something other than their physical reality, is a completely different story than someone like Bruce or Caitlyn Jenner.
Yes.
It's a completely different situation. And again, this is a complicated issue. There are types of gender dysphoria that begin very, very early in life. We don't know why.
Right.
Because these individuals are physically healthy. For some reason, they feel this intense incongruence and with their bodies, and it goes on and on and on, year after year. That's not what we're looking at now. These kids like Rosa, that's what we're talking about. The social contagion of kids who are hearing about the possibility of their bodies being wrong. They're hearing from friends, from at school, online, and so on and so forth. And then they are latching on to this idea. Very different than someone like Bruce Jenner. It's important to point that out. I mean, I want to make it clear that there are individuals, very rare individuals, who may benefit as adults of going through this body modification. And I would never suggest that across the board we make these interventions unavailable. I would say, though, that these are extremely rare people, that it is impossible to identify beforehand who's going to benefit from the interventions and who is not going to benefit. And certainly anyone under the age of, I would say, 25, I mean, the brain is not fully mature until around mid-20s, should not should simply not have access to these interventions.
I have to tell you, Doctor, that I'm really a lucky man because I get to meet so many people that, I thought my dad was in between the World War and he died about 10 years ago. And he said, life wasn't that hard in my generation. He said, we had our ups and downs. He said, but you're facing things that we haven't faced since maybe the 1930s. And he said, it's going to be interesting to see how you all work it out. And I thought about that for a long time. And I thought, my dad, in his own way, was, but not like the whole society is being thrown up against the wall right now. Who are you? What do you really believe? Will you stand for what you know is true, or will you cower? And people like you are rare, and you're standing, and you're doing it, maybe even with fear at times, but you won't let that conquer you. And you are one of the people that will be remembered after the insanity ends. You will be remembered.
Thank you, Glenn. Interesting that you should mention the 30s. I am the child of Holocaust survivors.
Oh my gosh.
So I do know what can happen in a totalitarian state that is indoctrinating its citizens with lies, and good people fail to stand up.
Yeah. And I tell you, so now that I know that part of your history, the first transgender surgery was in the Weimar Republic. It was 1925, and there were 4 years of surgery on this guy. He died when the doctor finally tried to put a uterus in him. But it was I think it was the University of Sexology or something in Berlin. And they were indoctrinating the kids with this. Weimar became very, very twisted. It started getting into the schools. And that's when the German people looked at these despicable brown shirts. And because the brown shirts were saying, we got to stop this, we burn those books. The first books that were burned in Germany were the books from the University of Sexology teaching this kind of stuff, because people didn't know what else to do to make it stop, and they looked to bullies to stop it. We are in such dangerous territory right now, especially with our medical doctors.
I agree, and I know that you had Stanley Goldfarb on recently from Do No Harm Medicine.
Yes.
Where I'm actually a senior fellow.
Oh, wow.
Anyone who's listening or watching, should check out that organization, Do No Harm Medicine, and join it. This is a group that is standing up against gender identity politics in medicine. Very dangerous movement. So thank you for having Dr. Goldfarb on, and thank you for having me on, and thank you for recognizing the evil, really the evil that is that we're living with right now.
It is an ancient evil that has been awakened again. Thank you so much, Doctor. Appreciate it. God bless.
Thank you.